How does actual teaching take place? Obviously, the question must be subdivided, for some things are more easily taught than others, and there are choices to be made among learning objectives. The classic ambivalence of the learner is exhibited by Arjuna in the second discourse of the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna thought he had learned well, yet somewhere in him he knew better. Knowing better, he invited Krishna into his chariot. He did this from an intuition that Krishna was a true teacher, but he may have done it also from some lesser or reflected motive, a gesture of doing the right thing, since when the pressure came, he felt a kind of regret. He made pious long faces at Krishna. He gave all the reasons in the book of conventional virtue and learning, for not going on with the struggle. Had the great war begun in earnest at that moment, Arjuna would doubtless have gone down in inglorious defeat. An ambivalent warrior is no warrior at all. It was a matter of karma, one supposes, that put off the battle until Arjuna made final decision as to whom he would learn from. But what made him choose aright? We cannot know, although we can generalize the problem by saying that all those little choices which came before gave a bent to his character, an inclination to his will. This will have to do as explanation, unless we say simply that man is a chooser, and Arjuna was a man. He chose to stand with Krishna, with spirit, not matter, which meant that he found himself able to break with the prevailing modes of action and habits of moral decision of his time, governed by material qualifications. We cannot, then, explain Arjuna's decision, since this would turn him into a function of some external conditioning. But we can describe at some length the course of his action. He chose, we may say, against the grain of his age. We are able to say this because the authorities of his time were all ranged against him. Krishna was not of that age. Krishna is not of any age, but stands for truth unqualified by time, undiminished by matter, unobscured by cycles. So Arjuna's choice was to break out of time, to act as a spiritual being. In the middle of the fourth round, a little beyond its mathematical center, since Arjuna belonged to the fifth race, there came this decision to anticipate human development in general by acting in his true individuality, no longer according to those rules of conduct which represented the average penetration of matter by spirit in behalf of the average mankind. But this is misleading. Evolution deals only indirectly with averages. The form of the racial vehicle of human development is initially designed by the wise. Mores, social structure, religious beliefs, traditions of virtue, of sin and wrong are the result. Growth within the matrix of all this convention is a slow process, and with the passage of time, especially in Kali Yuga or the Dark Age, the forms reflect the original inspiration less and less. Eventually, they turn into miscellaneous apologies for spiritual failure on all fronts, pious adjustments to suit the unheroic temper of the decline. These are the days of the usurper, who is expert in making excuses. He is the comforter of weakness and the rationalizer of wrong. How painful it must have been for Arjuna to be born to the destiny of resisting the usurper's power, even as he remembered all its justifications, which he had learned from cradle and in every childhood instruction. Was ever anyone so put upon as he? And here was Krishna, whom he thought a friend, telling him to turn his back on the traditional virtues, on the echoing wisdom of his forefathers. What kind of teaching was this? Something happens in the 11th chapter, which throws a light on the ultimate meaning of teaching. For a moment, Arjuna sees through Krishna's eyes. Can we say that for a moment Arjuna is Krishna? It is difficult to say anything else. This is the paradox of individuality, the mystery of the separateness, which is the condition of achieving unity. We are and we are not individual pilgrim souls. If there is any teaching at all, it may be, it occurs during such momentary unions of differentiated egoity. The two were one, of course, before the conjunction, but the learning one knew little of this. Or some part of him, the part that must learn, knew it not. And this conjunction, under what order or law does it take place? Are there schedulings of nature which govern such encounters? Krishna, we say, is a principle before he is a man. Or is it that he is a principle after he is a man? Has the learner to make this decision before he can learn? Is there a time in the cycle when a learner must begin to seek teaching in principles instead of principles in teachers? Are there realignments in the learning process, other forms of identification with Krishna than the ancient epic version? Plato set the problem in somewhat different terms. Can virtue, he asked, be taught? He soon disposed of the habits formed from social influence. These might be virtues suitable for getting along in life. But what had they to do with higher virtue, which is knowledge of the good? One can hardly get this from his society. Plato thinks, since such societies exist, are by no means matrices of higher truth. They, through the poets and sophists, teach quite other matters. To make a society in which truth about the good is the controlling ideal, we shall have to alter entirely the methods of education, he argued. Until this becomes possible, and he admitted that it might not become possible at all, truth may come upon a man only by accident, or, what amounts to the same thing, by divine intervention. Socrates, as Plato's spokesman, was careful to make no claims of teaching anything. He explains in the Theaetetus, I am not myself at all wise, nor have I anything to show which is the invention of my own soul. But those who converse with me profit. It is quite clear that they had never learned anything from me. The many fine discoveries to which they cling are of their own making. But to me and the God they owe their delivery. Plato does not seem to speak of the conjunction represented by the 11th Gita, although he intimates something of the sort in his 7th epistle, in which he also refers to the uselessness of trying to communicate ultimate truth in verbal forms. But if Socrates did not teach, does anyone? If we cannot count him a teacher, surely the word has no meaning. In any event, we are able to note that both Krishna and Socrates pressed their pupils back upon themselves. And this may be said to be a kind of teaching, the most valuable kind, no doubt, since great skill is involved in such persuasion. The art does not change, even the words of its practice, in some contexts of instruction, may remain the same. There is this comparatively recent expression. William Judge said, all is the self. He said this for no other possible reason than that the idea might be seized upon and held. The Gita says, enveloped in my magic illusion, I am not visible to the world, that is, to segregated forms of perception. For this is my divine elusive power acting through the natural qualities is difficult to surmount. And those only can surmount it who have recourse to me alone. Why all our teachings then? Why not devote ourselves to the self alone? It may be answered that the self is indeed not alone, and that the act of surmounting occupies time, with steps to be taken, terrain to be recognized, and bridges to be identified, some of which have more stability than others. These steps assume a somewhat different appearance in each cycle, since that is part of the nature of cycles, to present external appearances which are different. Hence the necessity of a teaching for every cycle or age. The ego, Blavatsky says, progressing in an arc of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of every plane. And since all experience has a measure of objectivity, a teacher who knows the cycles can give instruction about the surmounting that must be done in that cycle. Thus we have the portrait of the universe and man provided in the secret doctrine, appropriate to the needs of would-be surmounters of the present. The book is an atlas of our present and future evolution, which we are able to read and in some measure understand. It is certainly the work of a teacher from whom we can learn. But what is this teacher's final intent? Like all the others, she sought to press us back upon ourselves. In one of her categorical statements, in the article What is Truth?, Blavatsky wrote, as no two minds can be absolutely alike, each has to receive the supreme illumination through itself, according to its capacity, and from no human light. She puts the means of increasing that capacity as follows. We know that by paralyzing gradually within ourselves the appetites of the lower personality, and thereby deadening the voice of the purely physiological mind, that mind which depends upon and is inseparable from its medium or vehicle, the organic brain. The animal man in us may make room for the spiritual, and once aroused from its latent state, the highest spiritual senses and perceptions grow in us in proportion, and develop along with the divine man. A true teacher, it becomes clear, is one who is able to give an understandable account of the fact that we are all, finally, self-taught. Outside a certain highly spiritual state and elevated state of mind, during which man is at one with the universal mind, he can get naught on earth but relative truth, or truths, from whatsoever philosophy or religion.